there was this very weird dynamic where I was around all Black people, and then all of a sudden I was like one of a handful of Black people.
Hey, what's happening, man? This is Tip T.I. Harrison, and I'm your host here, expediTIously. I guess for today, I don't think it's accurate or fair to call her a guest because I won't be interviewing her per se. Why don't we call her a co-host for the day? Since we'll be having a candid conversation about a variety of topical things that are on our minds. So my expediTIously co-host today is actually the co-host of Daily Blast Live. Let's welcome Miss Erica Cobb. I'm looking forward to chopping it up with you, and I'm sure you have tons of insight for us.
Tip, I really appreciate you having me on today. I think the topic of COVID and how it's affecting the African-American community is one that we should be talking about, and we should be talking about it in all of our diversities of voices and opinions.
Right on. So there have been just a full spectrum of conspiracies, myths, rumors, and a few facts mixed in there as we have been learning more and more about the virus. What is it that you can tell us about the virus that has people of color being more affected?
Well, let's start with what you said about rumors, because we always talk about rumors as if they just appeared out of the clear blue sky. And we know that that is not the case. So a month plus ago, when the rumor was out there that African Americans were not affected by the COVID-19 virus, no one has ever questioned to this day where that rumor came from and what the intention behind putting said rumor was out there. Because when we have a rumor like that that's being fed on social media, I myself wanted to take comfort in the idea that maybe I'm not affected. But then I'm being 100% honest, because that's what we want to hear. We want to hear that we're immune, that it's not going to affect us. But the difference between me and the average person out there is I work in a media room. I'm getting information as it's coming in every single day, minute by minute. Most people aren't getting that information. And for those who receive that information via social media, that may have been the last thing they heard because they're living in a media desert due to media distrust. So let's have a conversation about that rumor.
And I think that rumor could have, contributed to a heightened level of carelessness within the culture and within the community, maybe resting too comfortably in a falsity is kind of what has us becoming more impacted.
Exactly, because you have to consider when that started. It started when people were just understanding what the coronavirus was. That was a critical window of time. Had we gotten the right information out to the right people, then we would have been able to perhaps saved a lot more lives and not have this virus run rampant in the communities, like the Black communities, that it's affecting the most.
Right. I mean, I think that's a fair point. Can you tell us what is it that we can do to combat these rumors? Well, now that we've made it right here, standing in the position that we're standing in, and we're fighting lockstep with one another. How can we move forward with the strength of reality on our side?
Well, we're gonna first start with, although it's affecting Blacks, African Americans in this country at a disproportionate rate, coronavirus is not a Black virus. So everything that we're saying to everyone in terms of personal hygiene, making sure that you're staying indoors, making sure that you're washing your hands, wearing masks. Now, the difference between having this conversation with the general public and having this conversation with people who are in African-American communities, African-Americans in general, is that we know that there's another side to wear masks. We know there's another side to the idea of staying inside when we compose most of the forward-facing workers, now called the essential workers.
Right.
So when we're having these conversations, we have to have these conversations in a way that accounts for what the disparity is, why there isn't an even playing field. But also, we also need to be really aware that there is a messenger for every audience, and we cannot lose the message in the messenger. We're not necessarily wanting to hear, some people don't want to hear from me. Some people don't want to hear from you. Maybe their messenger is someone else, but the prevailing thing should be the message is the same. We need to save Black lives.
Absolutely. I mean, I understand that some people may want it to come from a different source, and they don't really accredit it the same coming from, you know, people like us. However, those accredited sources are bound and restricted by the organizations or federations they may represent, which may jade their perspective and may prohibit them from giving you the absolute truth. I think that should definitely be taken into high consideration. Now, how about how people are living? Do you think that our community is taking the sheltering in place and the quarantining serious enough?
I'm going to say, okay. This is where I'm just going to go out on a limb, okay?
Okay.
So bear with me.
We got strong branches. Get on that there.
Thank you, because I'm gonna need some strength. When we talk about the Black community in media or anywhere else, we have to stop pretending like what my brother and my co-host Al Jackson will say all the time. We have this conversation. We cannot GPS our way to the Black community. This is not a homogenized community. We don't all live in the same places. We don't all live the same way. We don't believe the same things. We have 4 Black hosts out of 8 on our show, Daily Blast Live, which is incredible, by the way. Generally, there's just one. And the 4 of us completely, like, while we agree on the core issues, we don't necessarily share the same ideology. We don't necessarily share the same background. So when we say this homogenized Black community, let's please at least acknowledge that we are as diverse and as complex as any other community. And therefore, our underlying beliefs and ideologies may be different. I like to say even Wakanda had diversity. So what is that telling you? Honestly.
Absolutely. I mean, but for us to, you know, to clearly overcome the adversity of this pandemic and truly put it behind us, there is a certain level of distancing that must be done.
Right.
However, just realistically speaking, as you said, we're not all the same. We're not all in the same circumstances and situations. Some people feel like, okay, well, sheltering in place, well, I have a place to sleep. But once I wake up, you know, I live in shared spaces with other people that aren't in my family. So I don't usually spend all day home. I wake up and get out and, you know, go to work or go to school, and I make it back home in time enough to eat and bathe and go to sleep. So where am I going to shelter in place if, you know, if that is the requirement? Then you have others to say, okay, well, if I'm going to shelter in place and we're quarantining, well, you certainly had best not be expecting any bills to be paid, because how am I supposed to support myself if I'm expected to sit here and do nothing all day? Then you have others that feel like, oh, it's a hoax. It's the 5G. It's really the 5G. It's not truly the virus. And you have others that just truly, you know, they're going to break the rules anyway. How do you find each of these perspectives? And what is it that we can do to find alternatives that'll help, you know, either incentivize or contribute to the ability for people to shelter in place more?
Well, first, I find each concern valid. There's a reason why everyone isn't going to be able to necessarily follow said rules. People are in very different situations, which is the reason why I think that we should talk about the diversity in the Black community.
Right.
For myself, I have a situation in my family where we have an essential worker, a healthcare worker, contracted COVID from a patient who died,
Mm.
has two children who have, who are immunocompromised, and has to go back to work 3 weeks after she was cleared from the virus. So I understand that there are issues that are going to keep people from sheltering in place. But just
Mhm.
like we have herd immunity, so that the immunocompromised, people who aren't able to get vaccinated aren't affected, this
Mhm.
is like herd shelter in place, so that the people who don't have any choice but to leave the home are in the minority group of people who are exposed, and therefore there's less people around who can cross-contaminate with one another. This
Right.
is the one time that I am really going to be an advocate for a herd mentality of
Mm.
shelter in place, because there's always going to be an exception to the rule, and those exceptions are valid exceptions. What aren't valid exceptions are, I'm going to have a 40th birthday party, I'm going
Mm.
to be out in big groups of people. Those are things that I myself have been on Zoom calls with my family in order to stage interventions for people to be like, stay your ass at home.
I mean, I think that it would behoove us to offer some safe alternatives. Because although there's a shelter in place order, although we are quarantining, that doesn't mean that you can't go for a walk.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you can't enjoy your community while social distancing. I think if we kind of provided some alternatives, and so people won't feel like it's stay in the house or else, no other options. I mean, I think, like for instance, of course, it's much easier to do in more rural parts of the country, but there are some parks. If you're the only one at the park, then I mean, as long as you're, keeping yourself 6 feet away and don't touch things without washing your hands, that seems to me to be kind of a safe practice.
Well, and I would agree with that. But where I'm from, Garfield Park area, west side of Chicago, there
Mm.
were two areas that we would really gravitate towards when I was growing up. Once one of us went, all of us went. So how do we keep
That's the herd mentality.
right, exactly. Because so you're saying in rural areas, which I completely understand, and I'm in Colorado right now, so there is a difference. We understand.
Well, you have
Between
several benefits and alternatives that could help you in Colorado.
right. Well, because there's so much open space.
Yeah.
But at
Yeah,
the end
sure.
of the
That's what I meant.
day,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. That's what I was meant. Yeah, that's
yeah.
exactly what I meant. Open space, sure.
There's a lot of open space,
Yeah.
and spaces that, by the way, have also been considered essential services. So I do understand that too. I don't
Mm.
even think about that anymore because I mean, I've been here for 11 years, and it's
Okay.
like, it's just another thing. Like nobody even really talks about it. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
It is, man. Especially, switching gears. I think for anybody who hadn't caught on, we're talking about the recreational cannabis industry in Colorado and other parts of the country. Um, it's interesting that no one talks about it now because it was such a huge thing before the legalization. It
Hmm.
was so huge to find someone who had large quantities of this same plant that were used for the same purposes.
Hmm.
Uh, but now, since legislation has passed, those same people who were being arrested for this same plant are ineligible for benefiting from the profits of this said industry.
Right.
How how it feels like the same sentiment, the same agenda that goes into that is laced in COVID-19 propaganda as well.
Mm. Okay,
It just
come
feels
through.
like similar territory. You
Yeah,
know what I'm saying? Uh,
right.
and an example is I mean, I've seen reports where, okay, there are young Black guys who were going to the grocery store or Walmart or something like that. And after the CDC's advisory of wearing masks, went out in public, even, you know what I'm saying, taking care of essential needs. They say we're supposed to wear masks, but a mask on a Black person obviously is somewhat different than a
Mhm.
mask on a white person. So how do you make the rules and then you kind of try to punish one group of people for following the rules you made?
Well, and I've heard a lot of people say, I want to live, but I also want to live. I, I'm
That's a
just,
good one.
it's true. It's true. I mean, to be honest, I am very, very careful about where I go with my mask on. I'm generally going to my neighborhood store that I know the owners,
Mm,
and they know me. I just, like, we live in an area where, I mean, Colorado isn't heavily Black. Like, we are
right,
very, very much the minority. So
right.
anytime I'm not, and I'll be honest, a lot of times I'll do all the things just so I'm not putting myself in a situation that I might be in a compromising situation. So going to my neighborhood locally owned grocer or whatever, is far better than me getting in a car and going somewhere else where people don't know me. So, but I'm also not a Black man. And I
Yeah.
understand that that's even more of a burden. I think of my brother who
A
was
burden
driving.
and a blessing.
Sorry.
A burden and a blessing.
Yeah, yes, of course. But when you get the first time that and any discrimination really hit my family hard was my brother was on his driving back to Northwestern before a football game he was playing in
Mm,
and was forced to lay on the ground on the highway. So I'm always thinking about that. That's the reason why when we have the conversations on DBL, that's my first go-to. It's that image of seeing something done when you know that nothing you've done is provoking that. It's just the fact of who you are. So I do understand that there are a lot of issues surrounding a lot of different legislation or the way that we think in terms of how Black people are portrayed and how Black people are seen. But I also think that that also contributes to the way that we talk about COVID in the media, because we
mhm,
have to be really honest about the idea that the reason why people think that Black communities are so homogenized is because we've only had one representative allowed to speak at a time. And
mm,
when you have one Black person who's allowed to have the mic, then people believe that that's the way you're Black. Well, no,
right,
that's not the way you're Black. I just happen to have a really great audition and I have some things to say that people are grabbing onto. I am no different than anyone at home. I'm just a Black girl from the west side of Chicago who now lives in Denver because that's where my job is. I just
right.
continued to talk until someone started listening. And that's the thing. People need to take onus on themselves to be the messengers of their own communities, because no one is going to do that for you. If I can offer you a service of saying, these are the facts in my best intentions, coming from the CDC, coming from the WHO, coming from all of these different sources, and breaking it down as it pertains to my cousin, my brother, my mom, my dad, because most of the time I'm talking to one person. I'm only
Mm.
talking to one person when I'm looking into that camera. So if other people are receiving my message and they feel like, wow, that really resonates with me, then pick up that ball and take that to your community and tell them in your own words so that they can better understand.
That makes a lot of sense. I think I've also experienced as a Black man that the ability to be diverse is removed for you to maintain a certain level of Blackness. You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? Like, like just like, as a youngster, people used to tell me, man, why you always sounding white? By you for using correct English and you know what I'm saying, and just kind of having a more selective choice of wording. And I think, you know, that is something that, of course, it's projecting, you know what I mean? Because you feel as though the only people that are able to use these words correctly, to speak this way correctly while maintaining their blackness, is someone who lacks authenticity, when nothing could be further from the truth. We are a diverse group of people by nature. And I think that the complexities of our people is, you know, one of the many things that makes us great. But unfortunately, most of the people who make up the majority right now have little to no experience firsthand with Black people or a diverse group of Black people to be able to make that determination.
Right. And that's, you know what, that's an exceptional point on all of the points, because, you know, first of all, you're speaking to my spirit. As I mentioned, I'm a Black girl from the West Side of Chicago. I learned everything I knew until I was 10 years old about the idea of how to navigate in this world, how to protect myself, things that I needed to know that, like, now I look back on it, and based on where my life has gone, it's crazy that, you know, certain things were normal to me in one situation, but don't feel as normal in another situation. Like, my family moved from the West Side of Chicago to the suburbs when I was about 10, 11 years old. I continued to go to school in the city. My church was in the Austin area, in the city. I stayed at Big Mama's house for the entire summer. Like, there was this very weird dynamic where I was around all Black people, and then all of a sudden I was like one of a handful of Black people. And trying to navigate those waters in both of those worlds as a young kid actually prepared me for a lot of the things that I experience now. You know, when we're having the conversation about, like, oh, you speak a certain way, or, you know, you believe X, Y, and Z, those things aren't important to your Blackness. Those are just a part of the things that define and characterize you. It says nothing about what your forward-facing self to the world is still going to experience. We're still going to have to navigate. And I think that's where a lot of us get lost. And when we have this conversation about, you know, how I was raised and growing up with other kids, it's really just the idea of, you don't want to stick out. Like, that was the worst thing that I could have done. But the truth was, in one part of my life, I spoke too white. And the other part of my life, I used too much slang. It's like, you know, the nuance in this is really what makes me and makes other people a more complex individual. And I think that is okay.
That makes a lot of sense. I think now, of course, we are here to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I would be remiss if I did not applaud you for your coverage of the Gayle King interview and the remarks made about our brother Kobe. God bless his soul. Now, you handled that so eloquently, and I mean, I think your statements were so profound. Why do you think it was such a big story? And can you please restate your thoughts for the people who missed it? I thought it was handled so I mean, just profoundly.
Well, Tip, I really appreciate that. You know, I go back to the idea that I'm always speaking to one person at a time. And when I was speaking to that person, I was really thinking of my brother, my younger brother, Aaron, how he had to navigate his life as a young Black man, especially in a predominantly white high school, and what that meant in the conversations that my dad was having with us about that. And just to go back on, you know, the backlash on Gayle King, first, I need to just be very clear. I am not anti Gayle King or Oprah. I mean, not a...
Neither am I. I don't think we can afford to be.
Yeah, I am not a masochist, and I show respect for people who have paved the way. So it wasn't about Gayle. It was about the idea of what I've come to know the expectation is of a Black person sitting in front of the camera to America and to the world. And I think that it's amiss if we don't filter the idea of what's happening in Black hearts, souls, minds, and in the households. So I think the whole point was just missed, that there was this whole historical context of why we were so enraged about the Kobe allegations in terms of the rape trial. There was a whole element that was missing because we weren't talking about the conversation that I know in my household, my father was having with us about the Emmett Tills, about people who have been railroaded and just thrown in jail for being Black.
Right. Just because at the mere suggestion from a white person that they done something wrong, you know, there lynchings, life sentences, and all kinds of other assortments of punishment that have been handed down unjustly throughout history. And I think part of the reason that it was even expected from the higher ups for Gail to even mention that is because the resolution of that case was not as highly publicized as the case being presented. And I think that's another thing. Bad news travels faster. You know what I mean? But we did not understand all of the details of the case and its resolution and how it was resolved. I think that's a huge, huge part that must be considered as well.
Oh, for sure. And also just the nature of what my job really is too, because this is the first time that, you know, we're owned by a news organization, but we are not, we're point of view. So there are liberties that I can take and run with that the average journalist is not going to be able to do. My background isn't in journalism. My background is in morning radio. So point of view is just what I've done all my professional life for the past 20 years. Now we have another African-American female on the show. Her name's Lindsay Granger, and her background is in journalism. And those are two different things, because when you spin something and you say, we're gonna do a point of view, that means that I can go in to detail that a lot of journalists are confined, as you mentioned earlier, that maybe because of the organization that they work for or because of the expectation of their position, they can't share that. They can't get emotional and talk to their brother. They have to present it fair and balanced. I want to be fair, but I know that there's no way to truly be balanced because we're so imbalanced when it comes to the voice of the Black community. So there's some balance that needs to be made up for. And as long as I'm sitting in that chair, I will absolutely try to create more balance than was there before and leave room for the person who's coming up behind me, the Black woman who's going to take that seat and run with it, to do that in an even more profound way.
I heard you speak about, you said whether we wanted to have a comfortable conversation or a complex conversation. And really, I have to say that we need more responsible people in the media, like you, whether it's journalism, whether it's point of view. I just think that, you know, you represent so many of us. And, you know, speaking from a Black woman's perspective, you guys are the most successful, the most educated, the most brilliant, capable beings in the world. I just want to say thank you. And not that you made just me proud, but I think just the entire diaspora, you know what I'm saying? I think everyone needed to be spoken up for, because we always find ourselves defending our brothers and sisters before any conviction has even come down, before any true evidence has even been shown. We find ourselves just by the mere statement. There could be, you know, a TMZ article, which they have said time and time again, They're not bound by journalism. You know what I'm saying? It's for entertainment only. However, people don't take it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone just merely says that, T.I. got into an altercation, in public and whatever. And just by this statement, having a headline, you and other people who support me and who find themselves close in relation to me have to defend being close to me before any true evidence has been shown. And I think that is the position, or should I say, before all of the evidence has been shown, before there's a true conclusion that has been drawn. I think that's the position that every Black person is put in, when Gail poses those questions about, about Kobe in front of Lisa Leslie. When Oprah does a special about Michael Jackson after he's passed. When we're going after. Okay, so all of us have to defend why I still watch the Cosby Show, why I still like Michael Jackson music, why I still think Kobe is top 2 of all times. Why do we have to continue to defend ourselves, our brothers and our sisters, when it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty? And that's just not I don't think that's the card we've been handed.
Well, I would agree. We don't have the luxury of innocent until proven guilty because there is an aesthetic out there. Now, while I've said my piece on Kobe, I've also said my piece on Cosby, and it wasn't as glowing. I didn't feel, especially as a sexual assault survivor, and I've been very candid about that, I did wait until after the verdict. And after the verdict was announced, and it came in at like 12:01, we were going on air at 12, and I cried. And we were live. I was reduced to tears. I felt very, in a way, betrayed. I felt like, I felt really, really sad was the way that I can really just kind of articulate that. I think that those conversations, and in order to really have credibility, regardless of what side of the aisle you fall on, you have to be true to what your authentic beliefs are. And not everyone is going to agree with you. And people are going to give you backlash for that. But if I said, well, I can't just blanket be like, every time something happens that involves a Black person, they're innocent, they're fine.
Absolutely.
Because that would be disingenuous. And I don't think that that's serving. But that's the reason why when I stop down and I have a visceral reaction to something, because I have the space to do that, whether it be Cosby on one hand or Kobe on the other, that's why it's important that I have those yings and yangs, so that people understand that, yes, I support Black people. I want Black people to win, but I am not going to blindly stand behind every single Black person, because, we don't do that.
Absolutely not. And I think that that's what makes it a little more complicated, because of course the things that Cosby were convicted of, heinous, unspeakable, and deplorable, understood. And we would be able to rest in that if we saw Harvey Weinstein be treated the same way. Now, so at that point, when we have 2 men, both accused of heinous crimes, and one has been dealt with this way, okay? So even if you're not in support of him, you're not going to be in support of someone else that's a different shade of skin complexion being treated completely differently in the media. And that's kind of like, I guess secondhand support. You know what I mean? You're not supporting his action. You're supporting the imbalance of society.
So, and I understand what you're
Or
saying.
speaking
And
out against the imbalance of society.
right.
Both
And
men have these crimes. They're both guilty. They both should be treated the same way. No one better than the other. And that's just not what we've been dealing with. And I think that's where a lot of people who even know what Cosby did is horrible have to kind of like, yeah, but look, what about this though? Y'all ain't doing the same thing over here.
so do you feel the same way even after the Weinstein verdict?
Absolutely, because even after the ones so let's just say the headlines and how it's reported, right? When you read Bill Cosby headline, convicted rapist. Okay. When you read Weinstein, defamed Hollywood producer. You see what I'm saying?
Oh no, I completely understand what you're saying, because if you watch Daily Blast Live, I'm always saying convicted rapist Harvey Weinstein.
Right on.
Every single time.
Right
Every
on.
single time.
Right on. And I think those are the things that we have to hold ourselves to task and hold others to task at doing. And I think you
Right.
do a phenomenal job at that. So
I really appreciate that.
kudos. I appreciate you. And I know we kind of got away from the COVID-19 of it all. But there has been talks of quarantining. Have you heard anything of this?
I have heard of quarantining.
And could you share it with me?
Yeah, well, so I understand that some people have been in quarantine for X amount of time and have decided to basically set up camp together. I am for this.
Okay.
Done responsibly. Okay.
How do you quarantine responsibly?
So this is something that I have been considering, and I had considered for a few weeks. My younger sister, Ebony, is in Oakland, and she lives in an efficiency apartment, which is like, I don't even know if the girl has 200 square feet. Wow. Like it's a tiny, tiny space. Right. And she's been in quarantine for quite some time. And I just thought it would be really great to get her to drive to Denver and stay at our house. And so I understand why people are doing this. And I'm in full support only if it's done 100% responsibly. We had a doctor on the show today, and she talked about if you've quarantined for 3 weeks and you are not going to come into contact with anyone else, and the other person is quarantined for that amount of time, then you can take the steps to make this happen. So as long as people are doing it responsibly, and it's not like, okay, I'm just gonna, call a Tinder date over at the last minute, I'm okay with this. I want people to be mentally healthy during this time.
I think if nothing else, what we've learned from it, people really, really have a whole time dealing with themselves for long periods of time. You know what I'm saying? Our society is built up on human interaction. There's so many businesses and livelihoods been created that providing experiences. I think, man, the key word is I heard Dr. Sanjay Gupta talk about people are dating 6 feet apart. Okay, so how is okay, so how does this enter into the sheltering in place and quarantining of it all?
The dating 6 feet apart? I'm good with that. I'm good with that. So my husband and I were long distance for over a year.
Okay.
So I understand that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and we did a lot of FaceTime. In fact, we fell asleep a lot of nights FaceTiming each other. So I understand that you can build a very emotional, strong connection when you're limiting the physical touch. You are kind of forced to do that.
Right.
So dating, social distancing might actually get you a lot further than being able to, just date with no distance, if we're calling that dating.
I guess, people start touching when they run out of stuff to say.
Yeah. I'm not faulting people. I'm no angel over here. I'm just simply saying, if you're looking for a long-term relationship, this might be a really great time to meet someone that you are really vibing with.
That makes sense. That makes sense. We have also seen concerning reports about how Corona is specifically impacting prisons, and how social distancing is next to it, like damn near impossible in certain prisons, in certain environments. So did we not even have a pandemic protocol, like as a nation? Have we not kind of already had some systems in place?
Well, I mean, as we all know at this point, 45 dismantled our pandemic, basically watch group. So not to go diving 1,000,000% into politics, but there was a fail stop in place with the Obama administration, and that no longer exists. So when it comes to protocols, yeah, it is very problematic. And when we're talking about our prison systems and prison reforms, there are a lot of people who are currently incarcerated who don't need to be incarcerated. Right. I spoke to Van Jones this morning, who is just incredible. The initiative with the Reform Project is incredible, getting masks to the prisons. But there are a lot of people who are incarcerated right now, nonviolent offenders, right. Parole violations that were 10, 15 years down the line. All of these different things, and I want to ask what your opinion is, because if people are nonviolent offenders, why are they packed in like sardines, just being exposed to this virus when we don't even have a solution for it?
I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like the mass incarceration prison industry, it's incentivized with free labor to produce products that sell at fair market value. Some of them even publicly traded. I think that it all you follow the money. Anytime you have a question, just follow the money. Who's making money off of it? Who's it going to benefit the most? And then you could kind of see what the intent, the agenda, or just the true belief structure behind decisions that are made as it pertains to prison. And I mean, but I, for one, think you can't call yourself the greatest nation in the world and just arrest your troubles away. You can't just like lock up your citizens and assume that you're achieving greatness. You haven't resolved any issue. You haven't fixed any problems. You've just kind of you put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, basically. And I think that's what America has kind of became famous for, and I mean, sad, but true. I think that's the cold hard facts that we're dealing with.
Well, I mean, if we're following the money, that's how everything is always following the money. Right. People didn't take COVID-19 seriously until the economy started to collapse. That's when they were like, oh, maybe this isn't a conspiracy, because there's no way that white people are going to allow industry to collapse and money to be lost during a pandemic that only affects a certain part of the population. But when we're talking about prison, and I know this goes into a totally different area, and we've spoken twice. I've interviewed you twice on my radio shows in the past. Right on. And the last, I'm sorry?
I said right on.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. Thank you for reciprocity is in order.
Hey, thank you. One thing that really always stood out to me about you was shortly before you had to serve time, you came in and your attitude was remarkable. Like you had, like, that's something that's always really like sat with me anytime your name comes up, because I remember looking at my program director and thinking, like, if I could just go through any day the way that he's handling and taking responsibility for himself it was just incredible. But the truth is, when we're looking at the historical context of Blacks in America, there's always been a prison system. We just didn't call it prison. So after slavery and, sharecropping and all of these different things that were intended to, Jim Crow, all these things that were intended to criminalize normal behavior or have more punishments for things in certain communities, Black and brown communities, than in white communities. The system was always designed for free labor at the cost of Black and brown people. And it's not until we have all of these conversations in mainstream media in honest ways. That's why I keep saying, and that's really a quote from She's Gotta Have It. When it says, do you want to have a comfortable conversation or you want to have a complicated conversation? And then you say what it is, and it's like, well, it's not complicated, it's just uncomfortable.
That's right. I mean, so let me ask you this, haphazard or no, do you think that there's coincidence in when the rumor was around that Blacks or our people of color, were not susceptible to the virus, and it was impacting the majority? We shut down industries immediately, you know what I mean? And everybody was, well, let's shelter in place, and everybody just hold up a bit. And now that our community is being impacted the most, now we can open back up now. Yeah, everything is good. We got it all under control. It's right where we want it. I won't give you your answer. Mm-hmm. I'm just asking, is that a sheer coincidence?
That is an interesting question.
You don't have to answer it.
Yeah, no, hey, I'm here. Let's have a conversation. So a couple things. My number one question out of all the conspiracy theories out there is, where did the rumor come from that Black people were immune? I want names. I want someone named, because that to me was the biggest disservice to the community. Is it a coincidence that now that Black and brown people are affected more, that we're talking about reopening the economy and reopening everything? If it is, because I haven't really had time to think about that, and I really want to think about that, because now I'm like, do I believe it or do I not believe it? But one thing I do know to be true is that would be a disservice anyway, because what do we know now? All of the workers who were nameless, faceless people that we considered it was like we were living in some type of hierarchy in this country, are now in the essential worker category. And these people have been on the front lines, and they've been compromising themselves in order to continue to either provide services for the community as well as continue to provide for their families. So by reopening everything, what we've really just done is say that we have a situation. Yes, is it affecting these communities the most? Well, right now, yeah, because everybody else is at home.
That's right.
So they're at home. So if we're going to reopen, just keep in mind that if that is a part of the agenda, that there will be a second wave. And that, if anything, will make people think twice about putting the cart before the horse.
That makes sense. And you speak a lot, you speak of the essential workers, and another just temple tapper. You know what I mean? I just sit around and think of stuff. How is it that when Bernie Sanders spoke of the essential workers needing $15 bare minimum as an hourly rate, the Republicans stood up and, almost flipped over tables. And now these same people who you did not want to have at least $15 an hour are the very people who are providing your necessities and who are, we're leaning on them. We're depending on them now. And a lot of the platforms that Bernie spoke from is, being adopted suddenly, serendipitously being adopted by the present administration.
Right.
That
right.
is
Kind of have them. Well, it's because the people that people were trying to dismiss really have everyone by the balls right now. Use your power. Like you're in your, anytime someone's given a moment, take your moment. Use it for good. Make sure that it's better for the people around you and the people coming up behind you, right. Because that's really what having the moment is all about. When people have these conversations, especially when they're coming from places of privilege, then when you say, oh, well, the fast food worker needs to make $15 an hour. Well, you can't have that conversation with somebody who's never worked in fast food, or the only knowledge of a fast food worker they have is a 16-year-old kid, not a mother of two who needs to provide for her family and also needs healthcare benefits. They're talking about people who might be temporarily going, okay, well, I'm going to work over here, not people who need and depend on this job the way that we're all needing and depending on them doing this job right now. So I do think that it's going to change the nature of the conversations now that we've rebranded service workers, essential workers.
Right. I think I appreciate your candid conversation. Thank you for sharing your time and allowing us to feed from your pool of wisdom. Okay. You are definitely a leader in the community, and every day you speak candidly from the heart on our behalf on Daily Blast Live. Can you please tell everyone where else they can find you to hear the rest of your prolific thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate the room and the space and having this conversation. I actually do a podcast of my own. It's called Come Back with Erica Cobb. It's all about rebuilding yourself and the idea of rebranding and having a second chance. I went through a divorce, unemployment, bankruptcy. So what people are really going through now is something that I've experienced in the past.
You went through a divorce, you got married again?
I did get married again.
Woo! Strong black.
Oh man.
Yeah. Strong black woman.
I'm a wife.
Keep you down.
Yeah. It's my thing. I don't know. But yeah, so I understand that, times get hard and things change, and it's just really a place that I can be, a little bit more positive and upbeat and, a safe place for me. So I'm just doing it to talk to myself. If anybody else wants to listen, you're free.
Right on. And where's this podcast? Where can we catch it?
It's on all platforms, but you can go to my website, comeback.tv, or hit me up on any of my social media at Erica Cobb.
All right, then. Now, here at Expeditiously, we have a tradition. Now, this tradition is the word of the week. So usually we take a word, a splendiferous selection from our vocabulary.
Okay.
And we provide the definition and use it in a sentence. Now, since you are so brilliant, I will allow you to do the word of the week. All you have to do is just find your favorite word. It doesn't have to be big with a lot of syllables. Okay. It doesn't have just a word that that you go to that you feel people may not know.
Okay. I'm going to stay on brand. Okay. And I'm going to say my word of the week is comeback.
Okay.
Because everyone is deserving of the comeback that they're willing to earn.
And everyone's comeback is different.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I thank you so much, Miss Erica Cobb. You've been a phenomenal guest host. Anytime I can come and return the favor again on Comeback, you just let me know.
Don't let your mouth write checks that your ass can't cash, okay? Because I will call.
You know what? That's a bar.
Okay.
That's a bar. Just let me know, man. I'll be there. I appreciate it. It's been phenomenal.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, and stay safe.
Likewise. And tell your husband I said hello.
I will. And tell Tiny I said hi.
I will do just that.
Take care.
Thank you all. This has been Expeditiously. Watch your favorite episodes of Expeditiously right now on the Expeditiously YouTube page.